guys. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, welcome. And for those of you who are repeat offenders, welcome back to the Conscious Basket Show. My name is Samantha McCord, and I am the founder and CEO of Conscious Basket. And on the show, we are going to be interviewing extraordinary people just trying to make a difference in this world and giving you tips on how you can too. So as always, if you like what we do, please subscribe, download a couple episodes, and leave a comment below. I will read them all. But for now, let's just dive right in.
Some people's starting points will be more difficult than others just because of what they're born into and what they have access to. But that said, if you want something, you can have it. You're gonna have to work for it, maybe harder than the next person. But it's possible. And I think that a lot of my story, it really just kind of highlights that.
Today, we welcome Nick, the founder and creator of the swimwear brand Nick Hill. After picking up and moving to New York City to follow her dreams to become a fashion designer, she's now made it her focus to create thoughtful, slow fashion swimwear that makes everyone feel beautiful. In this episode, we go over what slow fashion is, the impact of the fashion industry on our environment, how her brand is taking advantage of upcycling, and how important it is to know where your garments are made, because there are people impacted by every single piece. Let's dive right in. Hey guys, welcome back to the Conscious Basket Show. My name is Samantha McCord. I am the founder and CEO of Conscious Basket. And today we have the pleasure of welcoming Nick Hill. She is a designer of a really, really fashionable, slow fashion swimwear line. So welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. So she is giving us a smile from New York City right now, but that's not where she started. You're originally from, you were born in New Jersey, but you moved to Florida super young, right?
Born in New York, moved to Florida super young.
Okay, yes. That's right. And so tell me about those Florida roots.
I think growing up in Florida is just amazing as a kid. You know, you do so much outside. You have a love and appreciation for, I think, nature and the ocean. And I mean, some of my earliest memories were of me and my family, all wearing swimsuits around the pool every Saturday. And, I can remember on Saturdays and Sundays, we would go to the beach, and then at right around maybe 1, 2 o'clock, we'd head back home for lunch. And then we'd spend the rest of the day around the pool.
But so you didn't just begin, out of the womb, a designer, a fashion designer. You have had many things in your life to shape who you are today. But one of them that I thought was really surprising is what you initially went to school for, the psychology and forensics, and what that ended up being for you and how you ended up in fashion. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, my family is strong on education. Everyone in my family is like an engineer or a doctor or an accountant or, just really professional type of people. So it's very normal in my family to say, I'm going to be a nurse, or I'm going to be a doctor, I'm going to be an accountant. And I think that not out of pressure, but just out of what was normal and what I was seeing, I chose a major the first time I went to college that kind of fit into the ideal of what people in my family did. Mm-hmm. And granted, I at the time I wanted to be a forensic psychologist, and that is a little different than what the normal was for my family, but it was still on that pre-professional track. And, I still studied so many of the same things that my other family members studied, and it fit and it made sense. But it wasn't me. And on my way to graduate school, it was actually my mom who saw that I, because of something that happened, saw that it wasn't a good fit for my personality. And my mom actually suggested that I pursue fashion about a month before graduate school started. And I did. And I guess the rest is history, is what they say. I found a school that accepted transfer credits, which a lot of creative schools don't. So they would require that you go, through your matriculation for a full 4 years. So I didn't want to have to take those simple classes again. So I found a school in Atlanta, Georgia, that accepted transfer credits so that I could get a 4-year degree in 2 years. And the bulk of that time was only on fashion classes, which is what I needed. I didn't really sew well at the time, and I drew, but it wasn't the best. And I found a school that kind of just honed in and taught me all of the things that I needed to know to really understand design. And that began the spark.
Yeah, and you killed it. I know that you mentioned to me that you ended up graduating top of your class. Mm-hmm. You then started running a swim shop, bathing suit shop. And you expressed to me, you're like, okay, I would definitely want to know more. So your dream was to either do Cali or New York. And so tell the listeners about that. This is such a fun story for me.
Yeah. So I'm a store manager at this swimsuit shop, shortly after graduation. And Atlanta is great because there's like so many shops and malls and boutiques and restaurants. And if you want to own a store or do something along those lines, like Atlanta is a really great area for that. But I didn't want to own a store. I actually wanted to make the clothes. So that meant that I had to get out of New York. And in doing that, my best friend at the time had just moved to Cali and she was in LA. And I was like, well, this makes so much sense. I'll just move to LA and I'll be with her. But I knew that, getting a job in the fashion industry is really hard, especially if you don't have any experience, which is, where I was at the time. Mm-hmm. So I figured to, I don't know the right word to say, but to hedge my bets, I guess, I applied for jobs both in New York City and in LA, like using the address of my friend in LA and then the address of my cousin in New York, and just kept applying. And I applied, I think I was applying for something like 5 jobs a day for months. Like it was literally just like, autopilot, send the LA resume, send the New York resume, LA resume. Yeah, it was just like zero emotion behind it. And it was really just like,
numbers game. I mean,
it really was a numbers game. And, finally someone responded back after I don't know, maybe 8 months, 9 months of doing this every day. And I was so shocked. I was like, oh my gosh. And I want to say it even went to the spam folder. I don't even think that it went in the main. So of course I responded back, and I had a phone interview with this company while I'm counting my register one morning at the swimsuit shop. Because she wanted to talk to me before her business day started. And she, at the end of the interview was like, I think you're great. I think you'll be a great fit. See you next week. And I was like, wait, what? Next week? And she's like, yeah, can you start next week? And I said, well, remember I'm in Atlanta and she's in New York. So now I didn't want to tell her that. I'm just trying to buy time. And I said, well, to be respectful of my current employer, is it possible if I start in 2 weeks? And she kind of just went, fine. So now I bought myself an extra, week, to figure out how I was going to move across the country. And I got off the phone with her and kind of just enacted the help of my network. And the great thing is across my life, I've always made friends with, I don't discriminate with friendships. If you're nice to me, you can be my friend. And that's literally the requirement. And what that does is gives you such a wealth of people who have such varied backgrounds that if you're ever in a need of help, you have so many people that you can ask help of. And I think that because I treat people fairly and kindly, regardless of who they are, what they bring to the table, I think in that moment when I need help, it makes them more inclined to want to help me.
Yeah.
So I just called on my network, and I called my friends, where am I going to live? I had one friend that set me up with her boyfriend's brother's basement apartment. My friend in LA let me use her dad's FedEx account. He was a businessman, a dentist, and had FedEx for his company. So she gave me his FedEx account number to ship 5 suitcases to New York. I called another friend in North Carolina to help me physically move whatever I wasn't selling in Atlanta. So like, hook a U-Haul hitch to his truck and just bring whatever could fit in that little hitch to my parents' garage. I think my parents so we drove from Atlanta to North Carolina where my parents were living, dropped everything off in my parents' garage, literally at like 12 o'clock. My flight was at like 2 that same day. Hugged my mom goodbye. My parents bought my plane ticket, one-way plane ticket to New York because I had like $0 and 0 cents.
I have anxiety listening to this.
I have anxiety listening to it too. I don't know how, like, it's funny, I remember when we first spoke, you mentioned something like that. And I think when we have too much time to think about something, we just talk ourselves out of it, and I'd say for anyone that's listening, that's pursuing a dream that seems like insurmountable, just do it, just start and don't think about it. Just have confidence in your capabilities and know that if you're in the situation, it's for a reason. So I wouldn't say I'm religious, but I'm extremely spiritual. And I know that if I'm in that situation, it's because I'm qualified to be in the situation, regardless of what my opinion of me being in the situation is, right? Like all roads led me to this moment. So why would God and the universe and all my friends literally help me to get to this point if it wasn't meant to be and if I wasn't going to like crush it? So even when I'm like scared of like everything that's going on and I just don't know, I just focus on that and I put everything else behind me.
Yeah. And, it wasn't an easy thing, to talk about pressure and anxiety. It was an easy thing to make the decision to go first and foremost. And then to get there, there were a lot of bumps in the road. But then once you actually got to New York, they didn't pay you for 3 months.
No. And they told me they would. And that was really the only reason why I went. And that's important because I was unemployed for 364 days before I started managing that swim shop. And I was only at the swim shop for like 6 months, 5 or 6 months, before I got the job offer in New York. So I hadn't yet had a chance, and they weren't paying a ton of money. It was like horrible. So I didn't have any reserves built up. I hadn't really paid off any debt that accumulated over the course of that year. So financially, it was really, really tough, and this is why I had to lean on my network so much, was because I didn't have the financial resources to just say, oh, well, I'm a trust fund baby. Let me just, break that emergency glass and get, this penthouse apartment on Park Avenue. And like, that wasn't my reality. I literally had to rely on the help of my friends to get me here. And if they didn't help me, I wouldn't be here. And I'm eternally grateful for all of them, for that. And once I got to New York, I had to get a job that was going to pay me because of what I was coming out of. And when I got here and I learned, the place that I was working at the time, they paid every week. So if you were new, you were going to get every Friday, people got paychecks. So if you started this week, next Friday, you should have your next paycheck. Like, it was pretty quick. And when I saw that everyone was getting paid, and I'm like, well, where's my paycheck? And I went and I spoke to the accountant, and she was like, we don't pay our apprentices. And she looked at me like I was like smoking a drug. And I was just like, wait, what? And I'm like, but I have it in writing. She's like, yeah, we don't pay for our interns or apprentices. Like,
deal with it.
Pretty much. And I can remember leaving, and this company was like 2 blocks away from Central Park South. So like, it's on 56th Street, and Central Park is like, 1 block on 57th. And a lot of times on my lunch break, I would walk to the park and just, talk to my mom or talk to whomever. And it kind of gave me a little bit of privacy from my coworkers so that they couldn't hear my conversation. And I can remember that day, like walking to the park and just kind of like, like calling my mom. Yeah, like, wait, and she's like, wait, what? And I'm like, I know. She's like, but you have it in writing. I'm like, I know. Like, I don't know what to do. But for 3 months, I was just getting, reimbursements and refunds from previous business dealings, as a resident of a city and selling my furniture.
Yeah.
And at the end of 3 months, I just said to them, hey, it's the last day of the 3 months. So are you keeping me, or is today my last day? And they were like, oh, no, we think you're amazing. We're keeping you. And they began to pay me. But I didn't even have money to get home that night. In New York, you have to buy a Metro card to take the train. And because I was like operating off of like a prayer, literally, I had to ask my boss for like money to get a Metro card that night. And she gave me $20 out of her wallet.
I mean, that's the least she could do after saying she was going to pay you and then didn't pay you. But also the other part of it too is who you worked for was an invaluable employer. If you want to talk a little bit about who the actual designer was.
Yeah, so I worked for Norma Kamali, and that in and of itself was just such a huge opportunity. And it was, some people listening might wonder, well, why would you stay if they weren't paying you? And the answer to that question was because of the opportunity. The takeaway would be when you're pursuing a dream, you have to be able to see the bigger picture, because sometimes situationally, it might not be in your best interest and it might not be the best situation. But if you look at the bigger picture, I'm new to New York. This is a very established designer who I can learn a ton from. And if I can figure out how to survive for 3 months and do a good enough job to where they want to keep me, I know I'll start getting paid. So the question I had to answer was it worth it to, burn a bridge, to perhaps ruin my reputation because I ruined her reputation? Or did it make more sense to kind of just figure it out? Because of the opportunity that was there. And I felt like the latter was the better decision, because I knew that there were people that would literally give, body parts to be in that situation. So, here I am in it. And the question is, what am I willing to give up for it? And I figured if I didn't have to give up a body part and it was really just 3 months worth of income, and God keeps providing for me in these moments, and it's being figured out, I can manage. It's just 3 months.
Yeah. And for those of you who don't know who Norma Kamali is, if anybody's familiar with the Farrah Fawcett photo where she's wearing a red bathing suit and she's looking super iconic, that is the designer that Nick was working for. And by all means ended up being a real base to the designer that you are today. So
absolutely,
what a blessing and curse at the same time that experience was.
Blessing and a curse. But isn't that life? You know what I mean? Like, I think that despite our best intentions, we can make all the plans in the world. And while my strategy to get to New York was very quick, it evolved over the course of 2 weeks. It was a very well thought out plan, but there's no way that I could have planned for them not paying me, even though I had it in writing, right? And you just can't plan for that. So, in a perfect world, I would have had a savings and a cushion and a buffer. But because of the situation that I was coming out of, that just wasn't the case for me. And I think that's more real of like what reality looks like and what opportunities look like. People will always say, well, when I fill in the blank, I will do fill in the blank. And that's not life. Like, when you're ready for whatever fill in the blank is to you, a lot of times the opportunity is gone. And this is where preparedness comes in as much as it can be. So I was prepared in that I had the know-how and I had the desire and I had the education and the skills to put me in that situation. But there was no way I could have been prepared financially because I was unemployed for a year. And, it was just a horrible time in the economy to begin with. So I did the best with what I had. And, for someone who moved to New York with $300 and 5 suitcases and a one-way ticket, I've done pretty good.
I think you did all right. And the big part, I think, too, is the grit. I mean, to be a fashion designer, to move to New York, to really come from nothing to what you are now, it shows a lot of grit, and it shows a lot of dedication. And, really you do love what you do, or you wouldn't have been able to come out on top the way that you have. And so after working for Norma, then it opened up quite a bit of doors for you. You ended up then working for Ralph Lauren, who...
Yeah, so I left Norma, and then I had a brief stint with another designer named Charles Chang Lima for about 2 or 3 months, also extremely talented. And I learned some things from him too. And then I got a job at Ralph Lauren, like my dream job. Like, this is where I really wanted to work. And that was just the opportunity of a lifetime. Like, they employ some of the best and brightest in the business. And I always liken it to, it's like the Harvard of fashion. Like, if you're going to get an education in fashion, this is the company to get it from. And it was invaluable.
That is so interesting to think about, the transition from bathing suits and then to Ralph Lauren. And then you ended up saving all of the money for the seed for your business while you were there. And then you launched your swim brand, but you had lots of inspiration. So like, you had the Ralph Lauren, you had Norma, and then a little bit of it, well, I'd say a big chunk of it comes from your heritage being from Jamaica.
Yeah.
And you're first generation Jamaican, and you had told me this really wonderful story about your family and how they ended up immigrating to the US. And I just think everybody should know this.
Yeah. So both of my parents are from Jamaica. My mom and her parents immigrated when she was probably like 15, 16 years old. So like high school. My dad came later in life when he would have been like early 20s, perhaps. And my dad's parents, my paternal grandparents, had 8 kids. And there's a gap between the 4 oldest and the 4 youngest by a few years. So my grandfather and the 4 oldest moved to America, and they, got a home in New York, and everyone worked and saved and lived together as a close-knit family does. And they saved their money collectively for about, probably like a year or two. And with that money, they used it to bring my grandmother and the 4 youngest kids from Jamaica to New York. And that was how my dad and his family immigrated here early. I'd say probably late 60s, early 70s, somewhere in that time frame. Some people's starting points will be more difficult than others just because of what they're born into and what they have access to. But that said, if you want something, you can have it. You're going to have to work for it, maybe harder than the next person. But it's possible. And I think that a lot of my story really just kind of highlights that.
With the brand that you created now, I think that something that I wanted to highlight for listeners, just as a small education piece, is the difference between slow fashion and fast fashion. We're all familiar with the, $5 tank top and the $30 tank top and what the difference is. And you highlight a brand that really has intentionality and focuses on being more the slow fashion. And I just want people to understand the difference.
Sure. It's, it's so, when we have a shirt in our hand or a dress in our hand, there's a whole story behind that. Like, it just doesn't magically appear on the shelf. There are hundreds of people that go into bringing that product to the shelf and allows us to buy it. And fast fashion would be kind of defined as brands or companies that create fashion extremely quickly. And, every second they're cranking out a new design or a new style. And in order to do that, and what that looks like, it's probably in a not safe work environment for the people who are making it. They're probably, I don't want to call it a sweatshop, but it's possible that it's coming from a sweatshop.
You don't know is the point.
You just don't know. Their carbon footprint is like out of this world. It's insane. And it's all done to it's like a microwave, if you will, for clothes. And the output is just really bad things for people, for the environment. And us as the consumer, we get probably an inferior product. You have to start to question, right? Like they're probably getting paid pennies. And it's why it's so important to pay attention to what we buy as consumers. Now that would be, some characteristics of fast fashion. Slow fashion, in contrast, is usually made a little bit more soundly. It probably implements traditional garment construction techniques that are, tried and true, where time is being invested in making the product and quality materials are going into it. It doesn't necessarily mean that the carbon footprint is any lower, depending on where the product is being made. But because it's slower, one can start to make some assumptions about the environment that the product is made in. The people are probably being paid a little bit more. It's probably a smaller factory as opposed to a larger one that's just like cranking out material second after second after second. The people are probably being paid by the hour as opposed to the piece, which is really important because piece workers literally get paid for every piece of garment that they make. And that's something that typically happens with volume, whereas hourly workers get paid by the hour. So they're encouraged to take their time to make something and to really have it be at the best quality it can be, just because of the pay structure. Mm-hmm. And as women, this is all really important because the majority of the people working in these factories are other women. So when we think about, wanting to, have equal pay and increase the livelihoods of women and thus of their children, we have to think about the people who are working in these factories, because to get that $5 tank top, we're probably putting a woman in some part of the world in perhaps not the best situation. And while extinguishing fast fashion might damage the pay and the jobs of women in these countries, I think that reform of fast fashion is probably more ideal than just complete extinguishing. Like when we as consumers use our voice collectively and require and demand that the companies who make our clothing make them in more ethical ways and make them in more sound ways and pay their people more appropriately for the countries that they're in, I think that puts the safety of the worker in the primary position. The environment starts to become a little bit better for it because perhaps they're not just, releasing such toxic chemicals to make cheap clothes. Mm-hmm. And, we have to be, especially today when we're filming this, is Earth Day. So we have to
Happy Earth Day. I didn't know that.
Earth Day, yeah. We have to be cognizant and aware of how the choices that we make as consumers are forcing businesses to make decisions for the demand that we're putting on them.
Mm-hmm. And the difference too, I just want to be honest with everyone, when I had shop before I even was conscious of the fact of the difference between slow fashion and fast fashion. I would use those apps where, you'd get that shirt that, was like, oh, this is a $10 shirt. And, it comes in the mail and you're like, it's decent quality. Yes, I'll only wear it a couple of times because it ends up falling apart. But I never really thought about the chain reaction to, like you had mentioned, to the women that are in the factories, the chemicals that come off of the clothing, the fair trade that is not being considered. And I think that with your brand, and something that I just wanted to highlight, is that it is so thoughtful and so intentional, and that you have a new oh my gosh, collection coming out next month. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the intentionality and the upcycling that you're doing with this round of garments.
Oh, amazing. I'm so excited about it. So not all of the garments, but a good portion of them are being upcycled from clothes that I got at the thrift store and kind of just giving them a second life and redesigning them because there's nothing wrong with the fabric at the thrift store clothes, you know? So I'm able to take that fabric and do something else with it. And now it has a second life. And, you know, as a consumer, that's amazing because everyone can do that. You know, you can go to your local thrift store, buy something and redesign it to work for you in a way that is less impactful and less harmful to the earth. And I also get my fabrics from a recycled fabric store here locally where possible. I'm not able to get every fabric recycled, or I can't make every design from an upcycle, but I'd say with this collection, about 60% of it is upcycled or from recycled fabric or vintage fabric that I had from like forever ago. And I'm really proud of and excited by that. Like, will it fix the problem? No, but no single person or brand can fix it by themselves. It's a collective effort that we all have to take part of. And what's really important is just to like put some context to it. The fashion industry is only second behind the oil industry in our carbon footprint. So like correct, but it's oil, then fashion. And that's really important because it's being driven by our consumer behaviors. And that's why us as consumers really need to be aware of how our choices have a domino effect on what brands are doing. It's not our fault, but we have to hold brands accountable. Yeah. And when we say these are the types of products that we want, brands will fall in line and start to make them. They make these cheap disposable clothing because they think that's what we want. And we're not being educated to know any better. All we see is that $5 price tag. And we think, oh, great, here's this cheap shirt. But how many times do you have to replace that $5 shirt? If you replace that $5 shirt, 10 times, that's now $50 that you spent on a cheap shirt every time you have to replace it. You would have been much better off just taking that $50 and buying a better quality garment that can last you much longer.
Yeah. And even if you're not ending up, let's say we're not going to do upcycling, but let's say we're going to buy something new, shopping with brands that are very transparent about their supply chain, how they're manufacturing the products, who is manufacturing the products. And I wanted you to be able to highlight how you're contributing to the fact that, your wages are fair, you make in the United States. So I wanted you to highlight all of those wonderful points to your brand.
Yeah, I mean, I have a dress being made right now by a tailor in Harlem. His name is Elle, and he's making my barbecue dress, and I know his name, I see him, and it's just him making these dresses, and sometimes he has a studio that he works out of in Brooklyn. Sometimes he works out of his house in Harlem. And, it's an individual who there's like a name and a face attached to it. And I can most certainly assure you that he's being paid fairly for the garments that he's producing. Or, my other factory in the garment district, it's maybe a team of like 15 people. And they have the capabilities to mass produce if a company requires that. But because they own the factories and they are managing what's happening at their larger factories overseas, which I'm not at that level yet. I still do very small production. You have faith that what they're putting out into the world and the way that they're paying their people is fair. And these are questions that you ask, like, please send me, if you are working with someone that has a factory overseas, please send me pictures of your factory floor. Please send me pictures of the garment being made. Please send me, pictures of the team. Are the people happy? Are they being paid appropriately? What do you do with your waste? What do you do with your dye when you dye the fabric? What do you do with, what's your carbon footprint? Where does your waste go? Do you recycle just as a brand when your employees are throwing away their water bottles? Do you recycle the water bottles? Like, these are all questions that as a designer that I ask my factories during that interview phase when I first meet them. And one of the benefits of making the product in America, they have to get a minimum wage. They have to take a lunch break. The city of New York, because it's rooted in the garment industry, has so many laws and requirements of factories when they're creating product here. They can't just dump their waste on the street, and they have to dispose of it in very systemic ways and be thoughtful about, their output. And I think that that's what you get when you make things in America. And there's this huge disconnect as consumers that we have, where we as consumers, when we're at our job, we want to be paid the most, but then when we buy something, we want to pay the least. And that disparity is where a lot of the problem is coming in. And I can remember my product is expensive, and my product is made well, and it's premium. I use premium products. It's made by people who sew beautifully. And I charge for that, and I'm okay with that. And if someone's not looking for premium product, then my swimwear probably isn't the swimwear for you. My swimwear is going to last you for years. It's going to look amazing on you every time you put it on. It's going to fit great. And the price of that is that it took me many times and many efforts to get there. Mm-hmm. And when we were able to sell face to face and have pop-ups and things like that, sometimes people would kind of look at the price and shrink away or maybe complain about it. And I'd say to them, it's made in America. What are you willing to work for? You want me to pay someone super cheap so that you can get a product super cheap. But when you're at your job, you're demanding $100,000 a year, so what are you willing to work for? And why shouldn't the person who made this garment demand the same that you're demanding when it comes to their pay? Yeah. And seamstresses make really good money in New York. I don't know about the rest of the country, but in New York, a seamstress can command a lot of money, especially the more experience that they have, because they're so difficult to find.
Yeah. And, I think that all of those things are things to consider when you're shopping, and just making sure, you look at that price tag and what the trickle effect is, like you mentioned before. And, before we round out the meeting with you, I wanted to just say, what, if you were to leave the listeners with one thing, what do you want them to remember about you and your brand, and about the intentionality behind everything?
My goal is just to make women feel beautiful in the skin that they're in when they are their most vulnerable in public. And I make clothes and swimwear that really have you at the heart of it. I question, is she going to feel beautiful in this? Is she going to feel comfortable in it? Do I feel beautiful in it? And, I think you've got a friend in me, the products are really just made with you in mind. And I don't make a lot of anything. Everything is, made in small batches, and it's made by people whose names and faces I know. And they take the same pride and care in making these garments for you the way that I do.
Well, thank you so much for joining us and explaining everything about slow fashion versus fast fashion, and all that you do to make sure that people are paid properly, products are, very good quality. And I think that something that really hit for me was, you are the most vulnerable in a bathing suit in public, and feeling confident and beautiful in that bathing suit because of the quality of it as well, holding in those little imperfections that we all think that are imperfect, but you guys are perfect. Take it easy on yourselves.
Yes.
Thank you so much for, creating such a wonderful product for everybody and joining us today. And thank you guys all for listening. So we'll see you all next time.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you all for joining us on another episode of Conscious Basket. And just a small reminder, Conscious Basket is not just hosting interviews. We are in the process of launching our marketplace, where our goal is to make it super easy for you to make conscious decisions about what you're buying by knowing the origin of the products and services. We're using our technology to highlight a transparent supply chain with our vendors, which means you know what goes into those products and where they came from, to make sure those things you buy don't weigh on your conscience. And to ensure this peace of mind, we have developed a score to rank the sustainability of the purchase. For instance, how much water is being used, trees saved, animal lives, human rights, and so on. So, if you're an entrepreneur with a sustainable product and would be interested in being on the platform, please email us at info@consciousbasket.com. Also, if you're an entrepreneur, thought leader, or academic that would like to be a guest on the show, please drop us a line at the same email. And if you're just interested in taking a closer look at us, you could also take a look at our website, which is www.consciousbasket.com. And as always, you can explore the topics we discussed in the show notes and find many more topics on all of our social platforms. So give us a follow on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn @ConsciousBasket. If you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to our show and leave us a comment with any key takeaways. I read them all. Share with your friends, family, post a screenshot on your social about the podcast so that we can extend our reach to help propel our movement forward. Finally, just another small reminder that perfectionism is not the goal here. In my opinion, perfectionism is what gets in the way of all of us collectively picking what I like to call your thing, which is whatever you choose to make a positive impact on this world. Thank you again for joining us.